Thor, the mighty son of Odin, the all-powerful Allfather and the revered god of thunder, stood tall as the protector of mankind, wielding his enchanted hammer Mjolnir. Yet despite his many victories in battle, both against giants and foes of Asgard, he found himself locked in a seemingly absurd struggle, opening a simple bag of food. It was, to his great frustration, turning out to be one of the most challenging tasks he had ever faced. Thor's mighty arms, which had felled legions of enemies and crushed mountains, strained as he tugged at the leather cords of the bag, but it remained stubbornly sealed. He grunted, beads of sweat forming on his brow, but the sack refused to yield. This unusual predicament was the result of a journey that Thor had embarked upon with his loyal and swift-footed human servant, Thialfi, and Loki, the trickster goddess known for her cunning and often troublesome ways. Their destination was Jotunheim, the land of the giants, a realm filled with danger, magic, and challenges unlike any other. The journey had begun without incident, but soon the three travelers encountered a giant named Skrymir, a towering figure with muscles as thick as oak trunks and a face weathered by the cold winds of Jotunheim. Skrymir, recognizing Thor and his companions, had offered to accompany them on their journey. The giant's booming voice echoed through the mountains as he explained that he would carry their provisions in his bag, saving them the burden of lugging their food and supplies across the treacherous terrain. It seemed like an act of kindness, but there was something about Skrymir's smile that made Loki narrow her eyes suspiciously. Still, they accepted his offer, and the journey continued with Skrymir walking alongside them, his heavy footsteps shaking the ground with each step. As night fell, the group made camp beneath the canopy of stars, the cold air biting at their skin. Skrymir, seemingly unbothered by the chill, soon fell into a deep sleep, his snores reverberating like thunder across the landscape. Thor, now feeling the sharp pangs of hunger, decided to retrieve some food from the giant's bag. However, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't untie the intricate knots that held the sack closed. His frustration grew with each failed attempt, his stomach rumbling louder as the night wore on. In his irritation, Thor decided to wake the giant. But Skrymir was no ordinary giant. He was an ancient and powerful being, and waking him was no simple task. Thor raised Mjolnir, the weapon that had vanquished so many enemies, and struck the giant on the head with all the force he could muster. To Thor's astonishment, Skrymir merely stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about a falling acorn before rolling over and resuming his slumber. Undeterred, Thor tried again. He swung Mjolnir down with even greater strength, the force of the blow powerful enough to crush the skull of any lesser being. Yet again, Skrymir barely reacted, muttering under his breath about a stray branch before falling back into deep sleep. Thor's eyes widened in disbelief. How could this giant withstand Mjolnir's might? Refusing to be defeated, Thor delivered a third and final strike, channeling all his divine fury into the blow. Mjolnir crashed down upon Skrymir's skull with the force of a thunderclap. But once more, the giant merely shrugged it off, commenting in his sleep about how strange it was to feel acorns falling from the sky. Thor stood there, hammer in hand, utterly perplexed. No enemy had ever withstood Mjolnir's blows like this before. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, Skrymir awoke, yawning as if nothing had happened. He gathered his things and bid them farewell, continuing on his way. Thor, Loki, and Thialfi, still stunned by the events of the previous night, watched him depart before continuing their journey, determined to reach their destination, Utgard, a massive fortress ruled by the giants. The towering walls of the fortress soon came into view, dwarfing even the mighty Asgardian gods. Inside, the great hall echoed with the sounds of laughter and the clatter of feasting giants, their voices booming as they drank and boasted of their many feats. At the head of the hall sat Utgard Loki, the king of the giants, his sharp eyes gleaming with intelligence as he sized up his new visitors. He greeted Thor and his companions with a sly smile, clearly amused by their presence. Rather than welcoming them with open arms, however, Utgard Loki issued a challenge. Each of the travelers was to prove their worth by showcasing their greatest skill. The giants, being a proud and competitive race, valued strength and ability above all else, and they demanded that Thor, Loki, and Thialfi demonstrate their talents if they wished to earn their respect. Loki, always eager to prove himself, stepped forward first. He boasted that he was the fastest eater in all the 9 realms, capable of devouring food faster than anyone alive. Utgard Loki, intrigued, called forth his servant, a gaunt and eerie figure named Logi, to compete against Loki in a contest of speed eating. A long trough filled with food was brought before them, and the two contestants were placed at either end, ready to devour their way inward. Loki, ever confident, tore into the food with astonishing speed, his hands and mouth moving in a blur as he consumed everything in his path. Meat, bread, and fruit disappeared into his ravenous maw, and for a moment, it seemed as though Loki would easily win. But when he reached the center of the trough, he looked up and saw that Loki had not only eaten all the food on his side, but also the bones, and even the trough itself. Loki's jaw dropped in disbelief. His opponent had consumed everything in sight, leaving nothing behind. The contest was over and Loki had lost. Next, it was Thialfi's turn. The fleet-footed human boasted that he could outrun any creature in the wild, his legs a blur of motion whenever he raced through the forests of Midgard. Utgard Loki nodded thoughtfully and summoned a tall, ethereal giant named Hugi, whose name meant thought. The two were set to race across a vast field, their goal a distant marker on the horizon. Thialfi was fast, unbelievably fast. His legs churned with superhuman speed, and for a brief moment he felt as though victory was within his grasp. But Hugi was faster still. Like a fleeting thought, Hugi darted across the field, reaching the finish line with ease. Thialfi, undeterred, demanded a rematch, and this time he ran as though his very life depended on it. He pushed himself harder than ever before, his feet barely touching the ground as he flew forward. When he reached the end, he saw that he had come much closer to Hugi this time, but still, he had lost. Despite his defeat, Thialfi insisted on one final race, determined to prove his worth. He ran with everything he had, his muscles burning with exertion, his heart pounding in his chest. But no matter how fast he ran, Hugi was always faster, a blur of motion that seemed impossible to catch. With a heavy heart, Thialfi admitted defeat. Finally, it was Thor's turn. The god of thunder, his pride stinging from his companion's defeats, stepped forward to face his challenge. Utgard Loki handed him a drinking horn, explaining that all the giants could easily drain its contents in 2 gulps. Confident in his strength, Thor raised the horn to his lips and took a deep, long drink. The liquid, cold and salty, flowed down his throat, but when he lowered the horn, he was shocked to see that the level had barely lowered. Frowning, Thor drank again, this time longer and harder, but still, the horn seemed almost full. A third time, Thor drank, his powerful lungs straining as he tried to empty the horn. Yet despite his best efforts, the mead remained only slightly diminished. Frustration and anger filled Thor's chest, but the challenge was not over. Next, Utgard Loki offered Thor the seemingly simple task of lifting his pet cat off the ground. But as Thor approached the cat, he saw that it was no ordinary feline. The creature was as large as a horse, its eyes gleaming with an intelligence that made Thor pause. Still, Thor was not one to back down from a challenge. He wrapped his arms around the cat's massive belly and heaved with all his might. The cat arched its back, lifting its paws off the ground, but no matter how hard Thor tried, he could only manage to lift one paw. Enraged, Thor demanded a wrestling match, declaring that he would fight any of the giants who dared challenge him. Utgard Loki smiled and summoned an elderly nursemaid named Ellie. The frail woman stepped forward, her wrinkled face and thin limbs belying her strength. Thor scoffed at the idea of wrestling an old woman, but when the match began, he found himself struggling. No matter how hard he tried, Thor couldn't overpower her. In fact, the longer the match went on, the weaker Thor felt, until finally, with a groan of exhaustion, he was brought to one knee. Defeated and humbled, Thor and his companions prepared to leave Utgard, but as they reached the gates, Utgard Loki revealed the truth. None of the challenges had been what they seemed. Loki had lost the eating contest because his opponent, Logi, was not a mere servant but wildfire itself, consuming everything in its path. Thialfi had been racing against Hugi, the embodiment of thought, which is always faster than action. Thor too had faced impossible challenges. The drinking horn had been connected to the ocean itself, and in his attempt to empty it, Thor had drained enough water to cause the tides to shift. The cat he had tried to lift was the Midgard serpent, the massive creature that encircled the world, and Thor's efforts had been enough to shift the very earth beneath them. As for the wrestling match, Ellie represented old age, an unstoppable force that even the gods could not defeat. Finally, Utgard Loki revealed that he himself had been Skrymir in disguise, and the blows Thor had delivered with Mjolnir had not gone unnoticed. They had formed deep valleys in the mountains surrounding the fortress. In awe of their power, Utgard Loki admitted that he would never allow them into his land again, fearing the destruction they might bring. Though they had failed the challenges, Thor and his companions had pushed themselves beyond their limits, accomplishing feats that changed the world in ways they had not anticipated. As they left Utgard behind, Thor's thoughts lingered on the lessons he had learned. Even gods, it seemed, were not invincible. If you wish to explore even more fascinating tales of the Norse gods and their incredible adventures, we highly recommend Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology, full of rich stories.